Hello, pirates. We all know that throughout Luffy's life, he's gotten two scars that really define him. One is the one below his left eye, and the other is on his chest. These two scars represent key moments in his journey to becoming the king of the pirates. We'll talk more about that later because the question here is, what about the other scars that aren't visible? I say this because I think we can all agree that, in reality, Luffy is full of injuries that, although they don't appear in the manga or are usually not visible, logically should be there. For example, the deadly wound Katakuri inflicted on him with his weapon called Magura. And it's interesting to notice that Oda does something special with scars. He only draws the ones that mark a turning point in the characters' lives. That's why, visibly, Luffy has only two, but in reality, he should have many others. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. All the scars Luffy should have or that he has, but we can't see for these reasons. So, get comfortable, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, leave a like, and let's start explaining all of Luffy's scars. Let's go in chronological order, because the first scar Luffy got on his body was the one he gave himself below his eye when he was a child, during his meeting with Shanks. He made it by stabbing his own face with a knife to prove his courage to Shanks' crew, since they constantly made fun of him. Despite his young age, Luffy was always quite proud and brave. Interestingly, Shanks showed that even before Luffy ate the devil fruit, he already cared enough about him to make sure his injury was treated. The scene of the exact moment when he cuts himself was not shown in the anime, but it appears in the very first chapter of the manga. This omission happened due to censorship. This scar is extremely symbolic for Luffy, as it was made at the moment he decided to become the king of the pirates. You could say it symbolizes Luffy's determination to achieve his dream, or at least one of them, since we know he has another. That's why this is one of the few scars whose design Oda has kept consistent throughout the entire story.
I'm not kidding around, you hear me? I'm really mad! Watch, I'll prove it to ya!
Now let's skip the chronological order to talk about the X-shaped scar on Luffy's chest and get that topic out of the way. This scar was caused by Akainu after he executed Luffy's brother. At that moment, Luffy was in shock and had to be rescued by Jinbei and his allies, who prevented him from becoming the next victim. Even so, Akainu almost managed to reach them, attacking Jinbei while he was carrying Luffy. The blow wasn't at full force, but the damage was massive, leaving permanent marks on both of their bodies. Interestingly, the X shape of the scar on Luffy's chest doesn't make much sense in relation to Akainu's attack. This seems to have been an aesthetic choice by Oda, and there's nothing to complain about. The design is simply epic. This scar represents the loss of Luffy's brother, a moment he will never forget. So much so that, upon hearing Akainu's name, he becomes visibly disturbed. We saw this on Fishman Island, when Jinbei mentioned the Admiral and Luffy instinctively touched his own chest, as if reliving the trauma.
I'm putting an end to this!
Going back to chronological order, we now have the scars caused by Kuro in Syrup Village. He injured Luffy with his claws, leaving cuts on his left arm, right forearm, and chest, the latter overlapping the mark left by Akainu. Kuro used a fighting style based on extreme speed, almost like the Soru technique used by CP9 agents. However, he often lost control of his attacks, hitting anything in his path. Because of this, the cuts on Luffy weren't too deep and didn't hit more dangerous areas, such as the neck. If Kuro had fully mastered this technique, Luffy could have been defeated, since cuts are a major weakness for him due to the nature of his devil fruit. In the following arc, while facing Don Krieg, Luffy earned more trophies in the form of scars. He was struck by several spikes, leaving marks on his left shoulder, right abdomen, and right hand. The first two injuries occurred when Krieg fired sharp projectiles that wounded Luffy due to their cutting tips, unlike regular bullets. The wounds on Luffy's right hand were caused when he punched Krieg, who was protected by a cloak covered in spikes. Luffy completely ignored the pain to land a blow on the villain, showing his determination to win the battle. This was crucial to the conclusion of the arc, earning him the respect of both Sanji and Gin, even though the latter had started out as an enemy.
Just try it! He's got no place to hit!
In Arlong Park, Luffy faced the most dangerous pirate in the East Blue, a fishman with sharp jaws and teeth that he used as weapons. He suffered bites on his right arm, his ribs, and the left side of his neck. Even so, Luffy was driven by his anger toward Arlong, who had made Nami's life a living hell. Interestingly, despite Arlong using a sword, he never managed to cut Luffy, who even broke the weapon with his bare hands. This fight showcased not only Luffy's rage, but also his intelligence, such as when he used his stretched fingers to block the villain's attacks. Moving on to Alabasta, Luffy faced Crocodile several times. Interestingly, in all of those encounters, Crocodile drained the moisture from Luffy's body, leaving him dehydrated and looking like a raisin. However, let's focus on one specific occasion, which is the most relevant to this video's topic: the first time they fought. It happened after the Straw Hats managed to escape from the prison where they had been captured. When Crocodile saw them, he tried to forcibly take Princess Vivi, but Luffy stepped in to take her place. That's when the Shichibukai defeated Luffy with little effort, driving his hook into Luffy's chest at the end of the battle. Obviously, that must have left a scar. After all, it was a deep wound, and it's impossible to walk away from that without any mark. However, that scar was likely later covered by the mark Akainu left during Marineford. With this injury, Oda created a dramatic moment, ending on a cliffhanger that showcased Luffy's defeat and further emphasized Crocodile's power.
And you've all shared a common trait: fatal ineptitude. And in the end, the only thing you are truly qualified for is death.
Now we move on to Skypiea, where Luffy had another encounter that left him with yet another mark on his body. In this case, it was Enel, the main villain of the arc, who caused the scar. This happened during their fight, and since Enel couldn't hurt Luffy with his electrical attacks, he used his golden trident to strike him. On one particular occasion, he managed to stab Luffy near the ribs. Even so, Enel tried to hit him multiple times, but failed because Luffy avoided the attacks by literally switching off his mind and moving in a completely unpredictable way. Basically, he activated an Ultra Instinct before it was even an official concept in Dragon Ball, making it impossible for Enel to predict his movements with his observation haki. After facing Enel, Luffy descended with his friends and eventually arrived at Water 7, where we met Rob Lucci, a government spy and assassin. He also left some scars on Luffy. The first was on his chest, when after being revealed as an undercover member of CP9, Lucci fought Luffy at the Galley Law headquarters. There, Lucci used his Shagan, stabbing it into Luffy's chest. Later, in Eni's lobby, Luffy would have his rematch against him, but still came out severely injured. One of the most notable wounds was on his shoulder, where Luffy received both a bite and another Shigan from Lucci. Moving on to Marineford, Luffy was used as a punching bag by many of the characters present in the war, since he wasn't prepared to face opponents of that power level. And while most people mainly remember the scar Akainu left on him during this arc, in reality he suffered several other injuries. For example, Aokiji also caused one. This happened on his right shoulder, where the Admiral launched a sort of spear made from his ice powers. Luffy was saved from that situation thanks to the intervention of Marco the Phoenix. Otherwise, he probably would have been taken down. Now moving forward to the time skip, when Luffy began his journey in the New World, he received an injury that created a scar parallel to one he already had. This injury was caused by Hody Jones, the villain of Fishman Island, who greatly admired Arlong. Oda reflected this admiration in their fight when Hody bit Luffy exactly in the same spot where Arlong had previously injured him, on the left side of his neck.
Knock it off! Move aside, boy! Second gear!
Later, in Dressrosa, Luffy faced Doflamingo. At the climax of their battle, Doflamingo activated his awakening, allowing him to create several tentacles resembling threads using the surrounding environment. With this ability, he attacked Luffy multiple times, piercing two specific points on his body, the first on his abdomen just above the navel, and the second on his knuckles, his fists. The latter happened when the two clashed with their final attacks, with Luffy emerging victorious. As an interesting detail, this situation confirmed that haki does not make its users immune to piercing injuries. injuries, since the hardening of armament haki does not prevent attacks of this kind from causing damage at the point of impact if the force is equivalent.
秋は本当に戻ったのか、ルーシー。
At Whole Cake Island, we saw another demonstration of how cuts can overcome armament haki. This was clear during Luffy's fight against Cracker, when Luffy tried to block a sword strike using his right arm covered in haki. Even so, he suffered a superficial injury. If Luffy hadn't used haki at that moment, he probably would have lost his arm, which shows that hardening helps but isn't foolproof. Certainly, this injury also left a scar as a reminder. If we're talking about battles against the Sweet Commanders, we can't forget Luffy's fight against Katakuri. In this confrontation, Luffy received an attack that marked a turning point in the fight, leaving yet another scar. Katakuri injured Luffy with his trident on the left side of his abdomen. This happened after Luffy was hit by Flamp, which threw him off balance and prevented him from dodging Katakuri's attack. However, after Katakuri realized Flamp's interference, he injured himself in the same way to even the fight, since he didn't consider the battle fair. This moment was crucial for the battle, because Katakuri came to deeply respect Luffy after seeing that he wouldn't back down in the face of injustice. Finally, as a special mention, it's worth highlighting the marks on Luffy's straw hat made by Buggy in Orangetown. Let's count this as a scar since those marks remain to this day. At one point, Buggy took advantage of Luffy's distraction to damage his most precious possession, which he considers a treasure. This made Luffy furious, and after defeating Buggy and finishing the arc, Nami sewed the hat to repair it, but the marks remained visible. Interestingly, Oda continues to draw these marks on the hat, emphasizing that, among all the attacks Luffy has endured, this one was particularly significant. With that, we wrap up the video about Luffy's scars. I hope you found it interesting. If you liked it, you know what to do. Your subscription and a like really help a lot. Thank you very much for listening and see you next time. Bye.